May our Father, Messiah, and Holy Spirit be with us. Esther. It happened in the days of Ahasuerus, that Ahasuerus who reigned over 127 provinces from India to Nubia. In those days when King Ahasuerus occupied the royal throne in the fortress Shushan in the third year of his reign, he gave a banquet for all the officials and courtiers, the administration of Persia, and Media, the nobles and the governors of the provinces, and his servants for no fewer than 180. In 80 days he displayed the vast riches of his kingdom and the splendid glory of his majesty. At the end of this period, the king gave a banquet for 7 days in the court of the king's palace garden for all the people who lived in the fortress Shushan, high and low alike. There were hangings of white cotton and blue wool caught up by cords of fine linen, from wool to silver rods and alabaster columns, and there were couches of gold and silver on a pavement of marble, alabaster, mother of pearl, and mosaics. Royal wine was served in abundance as befits a king, in golden beakers of varied design, and the rule for the drinking was no restrictions, for the king had given orders to every palace steward to comply with each man's hopes. In addition, Queen Vashti gave a banquet for women in the royal palace of King Ahasuerus on the 7th day. When the king was merry with wine, he ordered Mehuman, Beizda, Harbona, Bigtha, Abagatha, Zathar, and Carcass, the 7 eunuchs in attendance on King Ahasuerus, to bring Queen Vashti before the king, wearing a royal diadem to display her beauty to the peoples and the officials, for she was a beautiful woman. But Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command conveyed by the eunuchs. The king was greatly incensed, and his fury burned within him. Then the king consulted the sages, learned a procedure, for it was the royal practice to turn to all who were versed in law and precedent. His closest advisors were Karshena, Shethar, Admatha, Tarshish, Maris, Marsena, and Memucan, the 7 ministers of Persia and Media, who my eyes are like burning right now. Media, and who had access to the royal presence and occupied the first place in the kingdom. What he asked shall be done according to law. To Queen Vashti, for failing to obey the command of King Ahasuerus conveyed by the eunuchs. Thereupon Memucan declared in the presence of the king and the ministers, Queen Vashti has committed an offense not only against your majesty, but also against all the officials and against all the peoples and all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, for the queen's behavior will make all wives despise their husbands, as they reflect that King Ahasuerus himself ordered Queen Vashti to be brought before him, but she would not come. This very day the ladies of Persia and Media, who have heard of the queen's behavior, will cite it to all your majesty's officials, and there will be no end of scorn and provocation. If it please your majesty, let a royal edict be issued by you, and let it be written into the laws of Persia and Media, so that it cannot be abrogated, that Vashti shall never enter the presence of King Ahasuerus, and let your majesty bestow her royal state upon another who was more worthy than she. Then will the judgment executed by your majesty resound throughout your realm, vast though it is, and all wives will treat their husbands with respect, high and low alike. Their proposal was approved by the king and the ministers. And the king did as Memucan proposed. Dispatches were sent to all the provinces of the king, to every province in its own script, and to every nation in its own language, that every man should wield authority in his home and speak the language of his own people. Sometime afterward, when the anger of King Ahasuerus subsided, he thought of Vashti and what she had done and what had been decreed against her. The king's servants who attended him said, "Let beautiful young virgins be sought out for your majesty. Let your majesty appoint officers in every province of your realm to assemble all the beautiful young virgins at the fortress Shushan in the harem under the supervision of Heg, the king's eunuch, guardian of the woman. Let them be provided with their cosmetics, and let the maiden who pleases your majesty be queen instead of Vashti." The proposal pleased the king, and he acted upon it. In the fortress Shushan lived a Jew by the name of Mordecai. Okay, that's cool. In the fortress Shushan lived a Jew by the name of Mordecai, son of Jair, son of Shimei, son of Kish, a Benjamite. Kish had been exiled from Jerusalem in a group that was carried into exile along with King Jeconiah of Jehudah, which had been driven into exile by King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon. He was foster father to Hadassah, that is Esther, his uncle's daughter, for she had neither father nor mother. The maiden was shapely and it says she was shapely and beautiful. And when her father and mother died, Mordecai adopted her as his own daughter. When the king's order and edict was proclaimed, and when many girls were assembled in the fortress Shushan under the supervision of Haggai, Esther too was taken into the king's palace under the supervision of Haggai, guardian of the woman. The girl pleased him and won his favor, and he hastened to furnish her with her cosmetics and her rations, as well as with the 7 maids who were her due from the king's palace. And he treated her and her maids with special kindness in the harem. Esther did not reveal her people or her kindred, for Mordecai had told her not to reveal it. Every single day Mordecai would walk about in front of the court of the harem to learn how Esther was faring and what was happening to her. When each girl's turn came to go to King Ahasuerus at the end of the 12 months, treatment prescribed for women, for that was the period spent on beautifying them, 6 months with oil of myrrh and 6 months with perfumes and women's cosmetics. And it was after that the girl would go to the king. Whatever she asked for would be given her to take with her from the harem to the king's palace. She would go in the evening and leave in the morning for a second harem in charge of Shashgaz, the king's eunuch, guardian of the concubines. She would not go again to the king unless the king wanted her, where she would be summoned by name. When the turn came for Esther, daughter of Abiahil, the uncle of Mordecai, who had adopted her as his own daughter, to go to the king, she did not ask for anything but what Haggai, the king's eunuch, guardian of the woman, advised. Yet Esther won the admiration of all who saw her. Esther was taken to King Ahasuerus in his royal palace in the 10th month, which is the month of Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign. The king loved Esther more than all the other women, and she won his grace and favor more than all the virgins. So he set a royal diadem on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. The king gave a great banquet for all his officials and courtiers, the banquet of Esther. He proclaimed a remission of taxes for the prominences, and amnesty for the provinces, and distributed gifts as befits a king. When the virgins were assembled a second time, Mordecai sat in the palace gate, but Esther still did not reveal her kindred or her people as Mordecai had instructed her, for Esther obeyed Mordecai's bidding as she had done when she was under his tutelage. At that time when Mordecai was sitting in the palace gate, big time into, and this just lets you know that Mordecai adopted her. So Mordecai wasn't essentially her biological father or mother, but he was the one caring for her and took her in as his daughter. So therefore, he became her Av, her dad. You know what I'm saying? Of course, we have our Abba, our Father in heaven. And it's a blessing. Me just thinking about the role of a parent. We're just like fitting in for our Father in heaven. Like he has many children. He's like, all right, I'm putting you here to raise them. All right, I got to take care of, everybody. I'm taking care of you right now as well, but I'm placing you right now to raise this child. Mordecai was placed to raise Esther. Like I'm placed right in the position that I'm placed in. It's a blessing to be able to raise up a child for our Father in heaven, because it's their child and you're just training them up in a way that our Father is training you up in a way to go, so that we won't depart from it. He's training us up so that we can train them up, and then that can keep going, a righteous generation of children trained up for our Father in heaven, but Esther listen to Mordecai's bidding, his command, her dad, it's a blessing. But Esther obeyed Mordecai's bidding as she had done when she was under his tutelage. At that time when Mordecai was sitting in the palace gate, Bigthan and Teresh, 2 of the king's eunuchs who guarded the threshold, became angry and planned to do away with King Ahasuerus. Mordecai learned of it and told it to Queen Esther, and Esther reported it to the king in Mordecai's name. Queen Esther, beautiful. The matter was investigated and found to be so, and the 2 were impaled on stakes. This was recorded in the Book of Annals at the instance of the king. I want to let you know too about the they say it's the Esther fast, because I guess it was in the Book of Esther. I'm not too sure, but a 3-day fast is a 3-day fast, no food, no water. I see that a lot of false prophets try to use the name of true prophets and prophetess so that they can make money off of it. It's just sad to see people making money off of scriptures, like YouTube books, cooking books, like all of this stuff, like meal plans and diet plans and workout plans, all orientated from the scriptures. My clothes were never supposed to even get sold. Even the clothes that I was selling, I didn't profit from it at all. Like literally, like it was like they were buying it for themselves. But Father knows the next clothes that I get, Father willing, when I put scriptures on these clothes, if anybody wants that, I'm going to purchase it out of my own pocket and give it to them, because, I never even wanted to do that, and yeah, I just didn't feel right, but like, Even though these current clothes don't have any scriptures on them, the next ones that I do get, Father willing, will have scriptures on them. And yeah, I'm not selling that. Like if somebody wants it, I'll pay for them and then just give it to them. You don't have to give me anything for that. You feel me? Because supporting me is supporting our Father in heaven. Facts. I mean, sometime afterward, King Ahasuerus promoted Haman, son of Hammedatha, the Agagite. He advanced him and seated him higher than any of his fellow officials. All the king's courtiers in the palace gate knelt and bowed low to Haman, for such was the king's order concerning him. But Mordecai would not kneel or bow low. Then the king's courtiers, who were in the palace gate, said to Mordecai, "Why do you disobey the king's order?" When they spoke to him day after day, and he would not listen to them, they told Haman in order to see whether Mordecai's resolve would prevail, for he had explained to them that he was a Jew. When Haman saw that Mordecai would not kneel or bow low to him, Haman was filled with rage, but he disdained to lay hands on Mordecai alone, having been told who Mordecai's people were. Haman plotted to do away with all the Jews, Mordecai's people, throughout the kingdom of Ahasuerus in the first month, that is the month of Nisan, in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus. Pur, which means the lot, was cast before Haman concerning every day and every month until it fell on the 12th month, that is the month of Adar. Haman then said to King Ahasuerus, "There is a certain people scattered and dispersed among the other peoples and all the provinces of your realm, whose laws are different from those of any other people, and who do not obey the king's laws, and it is not in your majesty's interest to tolerate them. If it please you, majesty, let an edict be drawn for their destruction, and I will pay 10,000 talents of silver to the stewards for deposit in the royal treasury." Thereupon the king removed his signet ring from his hand and gave it to Haman, son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the foe of the Jews. And the king said, "The money and the people are yours to do with as you see fit." On the 13th day of the first month, the king's scribes were summoned, and a decree was issued as Haman directed to the king's satraps, to the governors of every province, and to the officials of every people, to every province in its own script, and to every people in its own language. The orders were issued in the name of King Ahasuerus and sealed with the king's signet. Accordingly, written instructions were dispatched by courtiers to all the king's provinces to destroy, massacre, and exterminate all the Jews, young and old, children and women, and on a single day, on the 13th day of the 12th month, that is the month of Adar, to plunder the possessions. The text of the document was to the effect that a law should be proclaimed in every single province. It was to be publicly displayed to all the peoples, so that they might be ready for that day. The courtiers went out Pachir on a royal mission, and the decree was proclaimed in the fortress Shushan. The king and Haman sat down to a feast, but the city of Shushan was dumbfounded, like, "Whoa, you guys are about to do what to us?" When Mordecai learned all that had happened, Mordecai tore his garment, his clothes, and put on sackcloth and ashes. He went through the city crying out loudly and bitterly until he came in front of the palace gate, for one could not enter the palace gate wearing sackcloth. Also in every province that the king's command and decree reached, there was great mourning among the Jews, both fasting, weeping, and wailing, and everybody lay in sackcloth and ashes. When Esther's maidens and eunuchs came and informed her, the queen was greatly agitated. She sent clothing for Mordecai to wear so that he might take off his sackcloth, but he refused. Thereupon Esther summoned Hathach, one of the eunuchs whom the king had appointed to serve her, and sent him to Mordecai to learn the why and wherefore of it all. Hathach went out to Mordecai in the city square in front of the palace gate, and Mordecai told him all that had happened to him, and all about the money that Haman had offered to pay into the royal treasury for the destruction of the Jews, the Yehudim. He also gave him the written text for the law that had been proclaimed in Shushan for the destruction. He bade him show it to Esther and inform her, and change her to go to the king and to appeal to him and to plead with him for her people. When Hathach came and delivered Mordecai's message to Esther, Esther told Hathach to take back to Mordecai the following reply: "All the king's courtiers and the people of the king's provinces know that if any person, man or woman, enters the king's presence in the inner court without having been summoned, there is but one law for him, that he be put to death. Only if the king extends the golden scepter to him may he live. Now I have not been summoned to visit the king for the last 30 days." When Mordecai was told what Esther had said, Mordecai had this message delivered to Esther: "Do not imagine that you of all the Yehudim will escape with your life by being in the king's palace. On the contrary, if you keep silent in this crisis, relief and deliverance will come to the Yehudim from another quarter, while you and your father's house will perish. And who knows, perhaps you have attained to royal position for just such a crisis." Amen. Now that just lets you know that whatever position that you're in, like even like with money and all of these things, you don't, like our Father, like even me just reading Ecclesiastes, our Father puts you into a position literally for somebody else. Even like how Mordecai was in the position that he was in to be able to take Esther in. If Mordecai was never in the position that he was in, he could have never even took Esther in as his daughter to provide for her, to show her, like even if he didn't have the knowledge to teach her, like I was even just talking to my wife about. Like, you got to be ready to take in a child. Like, even me just reading with my son, like, hey, I have to do this with my son. I have to read with another child. If Father blessing me with another child, I have to be mentally ready to change his boy diapers or her diapers. I got to be mentally, physically ready. I got to be actively ready to play with him. I got to be ready. Schedule got to be by. You got to be ready for this stuff, yo. Like, so she was in this position to be ready for this moment right now, in this moment in time. This is real life, yo. Then Esther sent back this answer to Mordecai: Go assemble all the Yehudim will live in Shushan and fast on my behalf. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. And I and my maidens will observe the same fast. And I shall go to the king, though it is contrary to the law. And if I am to perish, I shall perish. So Mordecai went about the city and did just as Esther had commanded him. Amen. On the third day, Esther put on royal apparel and stood in the inner court of the king's palace, facing the king's palace, while the king was sitting on his royal throne, and while the king was sitting on his royal throne in the throne room facing the entrance of the palace. As soon as the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court, she won his favor. The king extended to Esther the golden scepter which he had in his hand. And Esther approached and touched the tip of the scepter. What troubles you, Queen Esther? The king asked her, and what is your request? Even to have the kingdom, it shall be granted you. If it please your majesty, Esther replied, let your majesty and Haman come today to the feast that I have prepared for him. The king commanded, tell Haman to hurry and do Esther's bidding. So the king and Haman came to the feast that Esther had prepared. At the wine feast, the king asked Esther, what is your hope? It shall be granted you. And what is your request? Even to have the kingdom, it shall be fulfilled. My hope, replied Esther, my request, if your majesty would do me the favor, if it please your majesty to grant my hope. And it said, accede to my request. Let your majesty and Haman come to the feast, which I will prepare for them, and tomorrow I will do your majesty's bidding. That day Haman went out happy and lighthearted. But when Haman saw Mordecai in the palace gate, and Mordecai did not rise or even stir on his account, Haman was filled with rage at him. Nevertheless, Haman controlled himself and went home. He sent for his friends and his wife Zeresh, and Haman told them about his great wealth and his many sons, and all about how the king had promoted him and advanced him above the officials and the king's courtiers. They do this stuff just so they can run their mouth. That's why it's hashtag no talking forever. What is more said, Haman, Queen Esther gave a feast, and it ain't no talking as in we not gonna like literally talk ever, but it's no talking as yo, you lead by example, yo. Like, this man running his mouth, he all right. What is more said, Haman, Queen Esther gave me a feast, and besides the king, she did not have anyone but me. This guy's fake, and tomorrow too I am invited by her along with the king. Yet all this means nothing to me every time I see that Yehudim Mordecai sitting in the palace gate. But there's no talking because we already know what's going to happen. Then his wife Zeresh and all his friends said to him, let a stake be put at 50 cubits high, and in the morning ask the king to have Mordecai impaled on it. Then you can go galley with the king to the feast. The proposal pleased Haman, and he had the stake put up. Okay. That night sleep deserted the king, and he ordered the book of records, the annals, to be brought. In this book of records, this is not Chronicles, because I was studying this. I thought that this was Chronicles that he read. They used to just write journals. Like, if you have a journal, that's basically what the records are, the annals, the journals of what's going on in this time period right now, in this time period of Esther, and just the time period of that life, So this is what they're talking about. The book of the records of the annals to be brought, during this time period, and it was read to the king. There was found written that Mordecai had denounced Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs who guarded the threshold, who had plotted to do away with King Ahasuerus with honor or advancement, has been conferred on Mordecai. For this the king inquired, nothing at all has been done for him, replied the king's servants who were in attendance on him, who was in the court. The king asked for Haman had just entered the outer court of the royal palace to speak to the king about having Mordecai impaled on the stake he had prepared for him. It is Haman standing in the court. The king's servants answered him. Let him enter, said the king. Haman entered, and the king asked him, what should be done for a man whom the king desires to honor? Haman said to himself, whom would the king desire to honor more than me? So Haman said to the king, for the man whom the king desires to honor, let royal garb which the king has worn be brought, and a horse on which the king has ridden, and on whose head a royal diadem has been set. And let the attire and the horse be put in the charge of one of the king's noble courtiers. And let the man whom the king desires to honor be attired and paraded on the horse through the city square, while they proclaim before him, this is what is done for the man whom the king desires to honor. Cook then said the king to Haman, Get the garb and the horse, and as you have said, and do this to Mordecai the Yudim who sits in the king's gate, amid nothing of all you have proposed. So Haman took the garb and the horse and arrayed Mordecai and paraded him through the city square, and he proclaimed before him, "This is what is done for the man whom the king desires to honor." This is real life. This is how you know you don't talk, you don't say nothing because you get blessed, for real, for real. This is tough. And then Mordecai returned to the king's gate, while Haman hurried home and said, covered in mourning. There Haman told his wife Zeresh and all his friends everything that had befallen him. His advisors and his wife Zeresh said to him, "If Mordecai before whom you have begun to fall is of Jewish stock, you will not overcome him. You will fall before him to your ruin." If Mordecai before whom you have begun to fall is of Jewish stock, you will not overcome him. You will fall before him to your ruin. While they were still speaking with him, the king's eunuchs arrived and hurriedly brought Haman to the banquet which Esther. And he got told, I didn't even peep, he got told that before he even went there by his wife. His advisors and his wife said to him, "If Mordecai before whom you have begun to fall is of Yehudim stock, you will not overcome him. You will fall before him to your ruin." They told him, our father never told him, bro. Wow, this is how you know you only got to say nothing, no talking, bro. Wow, this is my father sounds to do this. Well, they were still speaking with him. The king's eunuchs arrived and hurriedly brought Haman to the banquet which Esther had prepared. Look at this. So the king and Haman came to the feast with Queen Esther. On the second day, the queen again asked Esther at the wine feast, what is your hope, Queen Esther? It shall be granted you. And what is your request? Even to have the kingdom, it shall be fulfilled. Queen Esther replied, "If your majesty would do me the favor, and if it pleases your majesty, let my life be granted me as my hope, and my people as my request. For we have been sold, my people and I to be destroyed, massacred, and exterminated. Have we only been sold as bondmen and bondwomen?" I would have kept silent, for the adversary is not worthy of the king's trouble. Thereupon King Ahasuerus demanded of Queen Esther, "Who is he, and where is he who dared to do this?" The adversary and enemy replied, "Esther is this evil Haman." And Haman cringed in terror before the king and the queen. The king, in his fury, left the wine feast for the place garden, while Haman remained to plead with Queen Esther for his life, for he saw that the king had resolved to destroy him. When the king returned from the palace garden to the banquet room, Haman was lying prostrate on the couch on which Esther reclined. Does he mean that which Esther reclined? Does he mean, cried the king, to ravish the queen in my own palace? No sooner did these words leave the king's lips than Haman's face was covered. Then Harbona, one of the eunuchs in attendance on the king, said, What is more, a stake is standing at Haman's house, 50 cubits high, which Haman made for Mordecai, the man whose words saved the king, impale him on it." The king ordered. So they impaled Haman on the stake which he had put up for Mordecai, and the king's fury obeyed it. Watch your mouth, yo. Don't talk about our Father in heaven, Yehudim. That very day, King Ahasuerus gave the property of Haman, the enemy of the Yehudim, to Queen Esther. Mordecai presented himself to the king, for Esther had revealed how he was related to her. The king slipped off his ring, which he had taken back from Haman, and gave it to Mordecai. And Esther put Mordecai in charge of Haman's property. Amen. Esther spoke to the king again, falling at his feet and weeping, and beseeching him to avert the evil plotted by Haman the Agagite against the Yehudim. The king extended the golden scepter to Esther, and Esther arose and stood before the king. If it please your majesty," she said, "and if I have won your favor, and the proposal seems right to your majesty, and if I am pleasing to you, let dispatches be written countermanding those which were written by Haman, son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, embodying his plot to annihilate the Yehudim throughout the king's provinces. For how can I bear to see the disaster which will befall my people? And how can I bear to see the destruction of my kindred?" The king Ahasuerus said to Queen Esther and Mordecai the Jew, I have given Haman's property to Esther, and he has been impaled on a stake for scheming against the Yehudim, and you may further write with regard to the Yehudim as you see fit. Write it in the king's name and seal it with the king's signet, for an edict that has been written in the king's name and sealed with the king's signet may not be revoked. So the king's scribes were summoned at that time on the 23rd day of the third month, that is the month of Saban, and letters were written at Mordecai's dictation to the Yehudim and to the satraps, the governors, and the officials of the 127 provinces from India to Ethiopia, to every province in its own script and to every people in its own language, and to the Yehudim in their own script and language. He had them written in the name of King Ahasuerus and sealed with the king's signet. Letters were dispatched by mounted courtiers riding steeds used in the king's service, breed of the royal stud. To this effect, the king has permitted the Jews, the Yehudim of every city, to assemble and fight for their lives. If any people or province attacks them, they may destroy, massacre, and exterminate its armed force together with women and children and plunder their possessions on a single day. A single day on the provinces of King Ahasuerus, namely on the 13th day of the 12th month, that is the month of Adar. The text of the document was to be issued as a law in every single province. It was to be publicly displayed to other peoples, so that the Yehudim should be ready for that day to avenge themselves on their enemies. The couriers, mounted on royal steeds, went out in urgent haste at the king's commands. And a decree was proclaimed in the fortress Shushan. Mordecai left the king's presence in royal robes of blue and white, with a magnificent crown of gold and a mantle of fine linen and purple wool. In the city of Shushan rang with joyous cries. The Yehudim enjoyed light and gladness, happiness and honor, and in every province and in every city. When the king's command and decree arrived, there was gladness and joy among the Yehudim, a feast and a holiday and a holy day. And many of the people of the land professed to be Yehudim, for the fear of the Yehudim had fallen upon them. That's definitely a holy day. And so on the 13th day of the 12th month, that is the month of Adar, when the king's command and decree were to be executed, the very day on which the enemies of the Yehudim had expected to get them in their power, the opposite happened, and the Yehudim got their enemies in their power. Throughout the provinces of King Ahasuerus, the Yehudim mustered in their cities to attack those who sought their hurt, and no one could withstand them, for the fear of them had fallen upon all the peoples. Instead, all the officials of the provinces, the satraps, the governors, and the king's stewards showed the deference to the Yehudim, because the fear of Mordecai had fallen upon them. For Mordecai was now powerful in the royal palace, and his fame was spreading through all the provinces. The man Mordecai was growing ever more powerful, so the Yehudim struck at their enemies with the sword, slaying and destroying. They wreaked their will upon their enemies. In the fortress Shushan, the Yehudim killed a total of 500 men. They also killed Parshandatha, Daphan, Aspatha, Boratha, Adalia, Aridatha, Pramashata, Arasaya, Aradai, and Biasada, the 10 sons of Haman, son of Hamadatha, the foe of the Yehudim, but they did not lay hands on the spoil. When the number of those slain in the fortress Shushan was reported on that same day to the king said to Queen Esther, in the fortress Shushan alone the Yehudim have killed a total of 500 men, as well as the 10 sons of Haman. What then must they have done in the provinces of the realm? What is your hope now? It shall be granted you. And what else is your request? It shall be fulfilled, if it please your majesty. Esther replied, let the Yehudim of Shushan be permitted to act tomorrow, also as they did today, and let Haman's 10 sons be impaled on the stake. The king ordered that this should be done. And a decree was proclaimed that Shushan, Haman's 10 sons, were impaled, and the Jews in Shushan mustered again on the 14th day of Adar, and slew 300 men in Shushan, but they did not lay hands on the spoil. The rest of the Yehudim, those in the king's provinces, likewise mustered and fought for their lives. They disposed of their enemies, killing 75,000 of their foes, but they did not lay hands on the spoil. That was on the 13th day of the month of Adar, and they rested on the 14th day and made it a day of feasting and merrymaking. But the Yehudim of Shushan mustered on both the 13th and 14th days, and so rested on the 15th and made it a day of feasting and merrymaking. That is why village Yehudim who live in unwalled towns observe the 14th day of the month of Adar and make it a day of merrymaking and feasting, and as a holy day and an occasion for sending gifts to one another. Mordecai recorded these events, and he sent dispatches to all the Yehudim throughout the provinces of King Ahasuerus, near and far, charging them to observe the 14th and 15th days of Adar, every year the same days on which the Yehudim enjoy relief from their foes, in their same month, which had been transformed for them from one of grief and mourning to one of festive joy. They were to observe them as days of feasting and merrymaking, and as an occasion for sending gifts to one another in presents to the poor. The Yehudim accordingly assumed as an obligation that which they had begun to practice, and which Mordecai prescribed for them. I didn't even know that right here. For Haman, son of Hamadatha, the Agagite, the foe of all the Yehudim, had plotted to destroy the Yehudim and had cast pur, that is, the lot, which with intent to crush and exterminate them. But when Esther came before the king, he commanded with the promulgation of this decree, let the evil plot which he devised against the Yehudim recoil on his own head. So they impaled him and his sons on the stake. For that reason, these days were named Purim, after Pur, in view then of all the instruction in the said letter, and of what they had experienced in that matter and what had befallen them. The Yehudim undertook and irrevocably obligated themselves and their descendants and all who might join them to observe these 2 days in the manner prescribed and at the proper time each year. Consequently, these days are recorded and observed in every generation by every family, every prominence, in every city. And these days of Purim shall never cease among the Yehudim, and the memory of them shall never perish among their descendants. Then Queen Esther, daughter of Abihail, wrote a second letter of Purim for the purpose of confirming with full authority the aforementioned of one of Mordecai the Yehudim. Dispatches were sent to all the Yehudim in 127 provinces of the realm of Asheres with an ordinance of equity and honesty. These days of Purim shall be observed at the proper time, as Mordecai the Yehudim and now Queen Esther has obligated them to do, and just as they have assumed for themselves and their descendants the obligation of the fast with their lamentations, and Esther's ordinance validating these observances of Purim was recorded in a scroll. King Ahasuerus imposed tribute on the mainland and the islands, all his mighty and powerful acts, and a full account of the greatness to which the king advanced Mordecai are recorded in the annals of the kings of Media and Persia. For Mordecai the Yehudim ranked next to King Ahasuerus and was highly regarded by the Yehudim and popular with the multitude of his brethren. He sought the good of his people and interceded for the welfare of all his kindred. Amen. Yeah, Father Messiah was good with us. Now we got the book of Daniel. Father, when we're going to get to that, take care of that. Amen.